Hey everyone, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Hi, we are here with a one of a kind tier list on having fun. What do you find fun, Mike?
Yes, as Evan pointed out today, we're going to be focusing on kind of a different take on tier list. Rather than focusing on the strongest army or the most powerful units, we're going to talk about having fun. And in particular, we've played between the two of us pretty much all of the armies out there, or to quite a degree for some, a little bit less for others. But we certainly see them at all the events, and we certainly know what people really enjoy playing and what things frustrate them. So that's what we're here to talk about today. In the
Mm-hmm.
old world today, the state of the playing field, with some of our legacy rata thrown in as well, we're going to talk about which armies are the most fun to play.
Yes, exactly. So basically, just to reframe it one more time, this has nothing to do with competitiveness. For example,
Nope.
some of the most fun armies are ones where it's just all random, absolute insanity, just bonkers off the wall stuff, and it's just like roll a die, see what happens with your pigeon bombs, that kind of thing. And look, if you want to know which army is the most competitive, there's literally like 7 million videos about that. If you want to know from someone who's played, I've personally played as 8 of the factions. That's half of them.
Hmm.
Um, Mike, you've played as several of the others. I've also played against all of them. So I think we've got a good coverage of like what is actually fun and interesting to play, especially on a level
Yeah.
of I don't want to just have one list. I want to have little tweaks, little personal touches to put on there. I want to name my characters. I want to give them more customization. Like which factions out there give you that depth, especially because most people don't have the budget or the 3D printer required to make multiple
No.
armies for themselves.
Or quite frankly, just the time it takes to assemble them. Even whether you're 3D printing or
Yes,
buying from GW Direct, it still takes hobby time plus painting time, right, to get that
takes a
all
lot
going
more
and such.
if you
And it is
print them.
interesting, in particular from my perspective, while Evan plays more than I do at this point, I only get, a game in, maybe once a week or every other week and such. But because I'm so focused on running the events and queuing up the next event and all the amazing things that our team does at Old World Legends. But it is very interesting from my point of view because I'm seeing what lists are showing up every single month to our events, whether they're
Mm-hmm.
the in-person events, whether they're the online events, whether they're the one-day events, whether they're the two-day events. What I've seen the shift from last year to this year, and actually I've seen a more of a shift not based upon the meta. Certainly with our community, I've seen more of shifts based upon whether people are having fun or not. And
Yes.
so, yeah. So anyway, let's dive into it. Without further ado, let's dive in, Evan, and let's talk about the first army or first faction. So
Well,
where do you want to start, sir?
I think we should do alphabetical order because it's unbiased. Also because it's Beastman's first. All
Well, the
right, and
order doesn't
it's
really matter,
topical.
but that's okay.
It's
Okay,
topical because it's coming out, about to come out. In like
it
a
is.
week or
That's
two.
exciting.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about Beastmen. So what are your points of view? You've played Beastmen a bit. What do you like? What do you not like? And
So
tell
so
us about it.
just a few things for people who aren't you, Mike, who haven't seen me play in person. My first tournament I went to, I brought my new Beastman army, which I bought because of Old World. I never owned Beastman before, and I read their rules, and it was starting to get into the Old World, and I enjoyed the fact that hey, Beastman actually had a thing to do, something lively to do. They had lots of different play options. They had Minotaur focused builds. They had Beast Lords with very
Mhm.
much ambush oriented play. They had more elite rank and file soldiers, and they had skirmishing hit and run tactics. They had chariot spam. This just seems to be an all arounder great army for just imagination is your oyster. Just do whatever you want, right? That's what I was drawn to, and I can't say enough how much I was absolutely right about or the things I had seen. That this is just a fun army to play, and one of the most fun things about it is the rules because it's like great, my gore get to charge into battle, and then I have a small chance to roll a double on their primal fury test, and now they're all frenzied, and it's like oh, I'm about to hit you with like 70 attacks now. It's just
Yeah, it
fantastic.
is. Beastmen are interesting too because, in particular, from my point of view, Beastmen always had people who were really interested in them in previous editions of the game, right back in the fantasy, but
Mm-hmm.
they just didn't take off. There's probably multiple factors. Either again, they were one of the later armies or factions to be added to Warhammer Fantasy as a standalone faction. But I think the bigger thing is, quite frankly, their rules. And Tomb King suffered from this too, in terms of when the rulebooks came out in older editions of Fantasy, they were not the best. In fact, they were
Yeah.
one of the weakest factions. And so as a result, there's a difference between, hey, this faction isn't top tier meta, and that's okay. I'm still having a blast playing it, versus you just get destroyed every single game, bottom of the meta list, that's actually ruins the art, the fun factor for, quite frankly, both players. It's not enjoyable. So we never really saw people really get into Beastmen before, but the biggest difference is clearly, I think, the GW rules team, GTY and the other members of the team clearly put in a lot of love and energy into Beastmen, and I think it really
Yeah.
reflects in the rules. And they certainly didn't make them overpowered, but they certainly made them fun and competitive with some really engaging rules. I think the monsters in them still are not necessarily points cost. And again, we went over this in greater detail in our army breakdown and such. But I think, to your point, Evan, they are competitive enough and they're really cool to put on the battlefield. They have tons of personality. And
Yeah.
from the Minotaur builds to the Beastman build to am I frenzied? Am I ambushing? Lots of units, chariot builds, monster builds, they and
Let's not forget the
magic,
Centaur
goblins.
that are so
Yeah,
drunk that sometimes
they really add a lot.
they'll just stumble forward like aimlessly, and sometimes they'll be like, oh, now we're angry drunks, and they're just going to charge in all frenzied and run off and do a bunch of damage with their great
Okay,
weapons,
but
by the way.
we do need to put this on the list. So where, starting with Beastmen, where do you want to put this? At the top of our list, we have S tier is always a good time. Below that, we
Well,
have
seeing as
A,
how I
fun
have
and
the
interesting.
mouse, Mike, I think I'm gonna
You do.
put it.
That's what I said. Wow, all the way to S tier. Okay, all
Strong
right,
opener.
always a good time. Well, it's strong opener. We'll see if we still feel that way once we get through the rest of this
Mm-hmm.
list. I will say one of the interesting things with Beastmen is I saw a ton of them at the beginning of the edition where people were super stoked to play Beastmen. Though of course they players had the problem of not having the models available to them. There were some models from the AOS range, but quite frankly, very limited.
Mm-hmm.
As they were just shifting over from AOS to Old World, and the rest of the range hasn't been available till now. So people have found proxies or 3D prints or other models and such. So I think we're going to see more Beastmen. But it's interesting. We saw a lot of people with Beastmen at first, and
Yeah.
then we actually saw people step away from Beastmen for, I'd say, about, at least in our community, that what never got to zero, but it definitely was, I think, 50% or 75% less for a 6 to 9 month period. And I think that's because people were running into dragons and people didn't necessarily know how to deal with dragons. With Beastmen and such, the earlier days. But now that people are, in particular, got a lot more games under the belt, they know how to deal with dragons. We're seeing a lot more Beastmen reappear on the tabletop again, which is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just a really fun army to play. There's a lot of exciting things there. They are, I think, natively very exciting because they're kind of a glass cannon melee rush army. So you're not
Hmm.
gun line, you're not sitting back just shooting people, you're running right at them aggressively. Even Vile Tide, which is a shooting attack, is very short ranged. So you are
Hmm.
getting in the grips with the other person. You've got a lot of ways to either juice up and do extra damage, whether it's from Primal Fury or from your Demonology and Dark Magic type spells. Um, and then you've got these really aggressive, angry monsters who barely wear any armor. And it's just you combine all that together and you get something that is usually a lot of fun for both people. Most games that I play with Beastmen, like half of my army dies and half the other person's
Yep.
army dies, and it's like this is what it's supposed to
Lots
be
of things
like,
are
you
going
know.
to die. Whether you win or lose, lots of things are going to die. That's for sure. All right,
And
so we start there. Strong start.
my favorite part about playing Beastmen is that when people attack the gore and they're like, "Okay, I got 3 hits at AP3," and I'm like, "Bro, I don't have armor. Like, you can stop telling me that."
Yeah, but everyone forgets. All right, next up, you want to go into alphabetical order. So,
Yes,
Bretonnia. So this is still was popular for the beginning, and they clearly GW crushed it with the starter box with the Bretonnia models in this. People have always loved collecting Bretonnia in the past, even though they didn't have a new army book for long, long, long time. They weren't supported properly, but people just
25
love that.
years.
It doesn't, but people just love those knights in shining armor, right? That Excalibur, the quest for the Holy Grail, all those themes, very iconic, and they're super fun to paint for those players who actually get around to painting them. But one of the most beautiful armies on the table, and they did a fantastic. The rules are very, very strong in the current edition, and the box and the new models that they came out, particularly that Duke on the Pegasus. Whoo, that is a sexy model, so good. But despite being super beautiful to paint, despite being very, very powerful in the meta, and having fantastic models, not always the most fun to play with or necessarily against, is it?
Yeah, I don't know if I keep my bias restrained very much, but I 3D printed some Bretonian models, so I wasn't super sure whether I was going to like the faction, and then I played them. I played them 3 times, and I really wanted to make an Errantry Crusade list without any Pegasi and just kind of, basically just run at the other person with a lot of knights. And I found it to be mind numbingly boring. Like, very sad. I think the first problem Bretonia has is that they don't have a lot of units because they missed 2 editions worth of releases that could have brought them, new books, new characters, new artillery, let's just say, or new magic or something like that.
Yeah, the
Something that,
options of actual model units
yeah,
is definitely limited compared to most of the other factions. That's for
sure.
sure.
Like Beastmen had a very weak 7th edition army book and then didn't have an 8th edition army book, but Beastmen had a massive roster of units.
Oh
Bretonnia
yeah,
has a very limited roster of units, and without the Arcane Journal is very simplistic and doesn't have a lot of ways to play. The most people who are really into Bretonnia, like from a lore standpoint, are like, okay, I really want to get questing knights. I'm going to give them that banner that gives them frenzy, and I'm just going to run right at you. And I'm like, bro, they don't have countercharge, and they have like a 4-up armor save.
yep. Or they want to do the Grail Knights, and I think honestly,
Grail knights are fine. They're
again,
okay.
they're so iconic, they're so beautiful, and people who just love Bretonia just love to just put their knights on the table, and it's a blast. But I think actually the biggest thing holding back the fun factor for both the Bretonian player in terms of it kind of feels one tone the way you play the army, and quite
Yeah.
frankly for the opponent is the Pegasus Knights. I think the Pegasus Knights are just so auto take right now across the board in the spectrum that, and then they're so good, and because they have the 360 charge and they're faster than almost anything in the game and they can charge pretty much anything in the game,
Yeah.
plus you put characters with them, it just really reduces a lot of the depth and nuances that I think the army could have on the battlefield. Again, they made it incredibly strong, but the army is typically not having to have balance between, all right, I need my ranged phase to do with this, I need my magic phase
It's not
to deal with
combined
that, I need
arms.
to. It's really
It's a
not combined
highly
arms, it's really
mobile
just,
melee assault army with
it's how
one
many
trick.
Pegasus Knights can you get on the table, and that sometimes is enough to win the game. And I think that's where I'm hoping GW, not hoping, they will. GW is totally aware of this. They are going to address this. I don't know when. I don't know if they're going to do a meta update or a balance update in this year, 2025, or whether they're going to address this maybe at the end of the year, maybe next year, or second edition. They're absolutely watching people's videos and content in the community, and they are aware, and they will address it. We just don't know when. But until they address it, our video today is talking about the fun factor it is today, and I don't think it ranks very high, does it, Evan?
So remember, we're talking about how fun it is to play, in particular when you have like a narrative focus, when you're trying to have very diverse and interesting, unique army builds, and not just have the one trick that's really, really competitive and everything else is so bad that you feel like, why did I even? And it's not just that it's not as bad competitive wise, it's also just like not very interesting. Like if you just try to put a bunch of frenzied questing knights in a lance formation and don't take any flyers, it's not very exciting either. It doesn't actually work that well. Um,
Yeah.
and so, basically, through my experience playing with it and against it, I think it's a great beginner army because you just buy a couple units and you have everything you need. But at the same time, for a deep, interesting, diverse list, don't, I don't really
We
enjoy it.
often find
Yeah,
people start with Bretonians and they learn how to play the game. They have a great time, and then once they get enough games under their belt, they're usually eager to move on to a more advanced army. So yeah, I
yeah.
think to your point, Evan, it's one of the best, if not the best, starter armies. But typically, people play it, love it, have a great time with it, and then move on to their second army. So you need to give it a spot. Is it mostly good? Is it needs improvement, or is it snooze fest?
I think it needs improvement because I think that the thing that's missing, besides internal balance, is actually just needs some more unit variety. Like, I want to
Mhm.
see. So, for example, the nightly orders that Empire gets is already massively more interesting to me than anything Bretonia has knights wise. So, it's a bit, and they're really trash competitively. Like, I mean, I know that Nick tries, but it's really easy to go. Your whole army has no wizards, no shooting. It has furious charge with your White Wolf Knights. Okay, I'm just gonna march 2 inches away from you, and now the one thing you did that's cool, you don't do anymore.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the next one, or we're never going to get this review done. So, Chaos Dwarfs. Tell us about that. This is wow. This is an interesting one. It's we've rarely seen it honestly before. I've saw it I think once, only a handful of times in previous editions of the game because the
Yeah,
models. Remember, this is back in the day when people didn't have 3D printers. There weren't really a ton of proxy options, and they were all Forge World, direct from Forge World. So it was literally the most expensive army to purchase if you wanted to play Chaos Dwarves, and so we just rarely saw it. But there is a hardcore following of people who just absolutely love Chaos Dwarves, and I will say I think the design team, is particular for a legacy faction, I think they did a fantastic job with the Chaos Dwarf list. Don't get me wrong, it has problems, it has areas that could use some improvement, but I see people playing them, and I've seen dedicated people from when this old world came out to even now who love their Chaos Dwarves and can't shake it off of them. They have a great time, whether they're winning or losing.
Yeah, so they have an interesting vibe because they're very similar to like Warriors of Chaos, except kind of mixed with the dwarves, and they also have a lot of
More
Orcs and
options,
Goblins
though.
units in there as well.
Yeah,
And so I say, I think there's quite a lot of interesting things going on here. Like they have the dwarfiness of I'm a bunch of tough movement three heavily armored dudes. You can build like melee infantry units of dwarves, and I think the only reason why you don't really see those is because there's not a lot of character support that like the regular dwarves have
yeah.
in that like for example their Castellan and their their BSB Castellan guy, he can't give them like a word save for the whole unit that he joins or anything like that.
Yeah,
There's
you can't
no
juice them up the same like you can a normal dwarf unit, but they
yeah.
do have a lot more. They have the war machines that Chaos of Warrior or Warriors of Chaos don't have, right? So they got a lot of great war machines, and they have the Iron Demon,
Mm-hmm.
and they have monsters as a potential. So for a dwarf army, they get to compete in the, they get to do the movement phase because you move with faster than just the normal
Yeah,
dwarves. They get the shooting phase. They get the magic phase. They're actually have a fairly robust list. I'd say there's more
lots of artillery.
depth in things that they can do
Uh,
than Wars of Chaos or Dwarves can do individually. I think to your point, Evan, they are lacking more on the character side and maybe some of the magic item side for variety, but they're still a pretty fun
yeah, and they
list.
do have, and the thing is that they get the Black Orc war boss on a Wyvern,
That's cool.
who gets to then
Yeah.
have access to any and all things that show up in the Orcs and Goblins roster and items there, which gives you a second whole roster of units. So having that diverse army that's part dwarf, part Black Orc is very effective for competitive play and for just having a lot of options. So you can have a mostly kind of a mercenary slave Black Orc force where you've got these hardened orcs kind of being the front line, backed up by dwarf artillery and shooting, or you can
Mhm.
go full dwarf and you've got uh, the heavy infantry. There's almost like chosen and stuff like that, and you get to say, hey, I'm a dwarf, but also I've got magic, right? So I can just
Mhm.
use Steed of Shadows or Infernal Gateway and things like that to move myself around because I have wizards and my wizards ride on monsters. I think it's really
Yeah.
unique that they actually have wizards that ride on the big scary monster instead of the melee characters. I think that that's a good thing, and that's cool to have that variety that most other factions don't have.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. All right, so let's rank the Chaos Dwarves. Are they always a good time, fun and interesting, or mostly good?
I think they're. I think that from a play style and rules perspective, they are mostly good. They've got a lot of interesting
Okay.
things going on, but they're still a legacy army with no arcane journal, and then so then kind of relying on those orcs and goblins pieces to bulk up and fill in those gaps. So I think it's mostly good.
Yeah, I think where the fun factor falls a little bit short in this is the internal balance of the book, similar to the Bretonians, but the Bretonians are more extreme, where
Oh, they're
the,
yeah,
the good things in the meta for the Chaos Dwarves are clearly significantly better, which is why we don't see other things like the Fire Demons, and we don't see as many infantry bricks, or you don't see as many Orc units, and such, and you typically see a lot of the Iron Demons and such. So again, I think mostly good sounds pretty good. They're a really cool list to play against. A lot of things die, but I think inherently the internal balance of the book tends towards fairly flat rosters. We keep seeing the very similar rosters. We're not seeing the diversity amongst the rosters. So I think that's
yeah,
what keeps them out of fun and interesting
and they're
bracket.
also missing the Kadai Destroyer, which never had a real model, I don't think, but it's
No,
something that every Chaos Dwarf player laments constantly is that they wish they could use a Kadai Destroyer that they don't have.
well, you never know in the future, right? Old World is super awesome and popular. It might happen.
Yeah,
Just got to believe, Evan. All right, what's up next?
Demons of Chaos. So I've played a
Ooh,
lot
demons.
against the demons because I've got a good friend Andres who has both Demons of Nurgle. He brought them to our GT earlier this
They're
year.
beautiful army. Yeah,
Yes, he's a
fantastic.
great painter. He spends all his time painting, and he will not bring a single model shown up until it's already painted and based with little static grass stuffed in there. I don't know how he
That
does
looks
it.
great.
Um, and he also has a Demons of Corn army, which I just played on Friday. He brought that, and there was a showdown between a Demon Slayer and the Bloodthirster, and the Demon Slayer charged in and just did no damage and got squatted. It was great.
Oh
he,
no!
he
Oh
finally met his
no!
doom. It was great. I think that demons are very frustrating. Now, with some of the rules changes that we've made and that a lot of other communities have made, having their ward save on all the time is undeniably imperative for them even being able to show up because it is
Mhm.
so oppressively bad when it's just like, oh, I use a magic missile, you just get no protection. What?
Yep.
But even with that, though, there is still some wackiness, and they have a lot of units that just. I don't know if they spent a lot of time testing their rules because the demon units aren't very straightforward. They're not very transferable onto what they're supposed to do, and so sometimes they're really good, and other times they're just insane, and they just like you're just like, what are they? What do these do? Like I think
Yeah, I
the
think that's
Beast of
fair.
Nurgle are like a random mover that only goes 2d6, and just in this game right now,
Yep.
if you're a random mover that goes 2d6, you're really slow. Like you're a dwarf, and then if you go 3d6, you're really fast. You go like you're like a sniper, you know. But like if you're
Yeah.
2d6, you just walk really slow, and then yeah, so I think that most people when they play demons, they really want to have a mono god of a certain one list, and those don't work too well right now. That's the problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's my criticism of the demons list. As always, again, one of the most iconic factions, been around since forever for fantasy. People love it. Interestingly enough, they seem to be getting less love in 40K in more recent times with not getting its own
Throwing
standalone
some
codex. So
shade
we'll
there,
see.
Mike.
Well, come on, man, demons. I mean, how could you not have demons? So hopefully, that means we're going to see more
Jeez.
demons in Old World. That's my hope, right? So hey, less 40K, more Old World. Let's bring it.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think they do suffer from not as much attention from the design team. I think they were focused on other things, and the typical problems you have is when you want to build a mixed list, the synergies that you're hoping to get are very hard to create. The combos that you think would be there just aren't quite there. And also, oftentimes, surprisingly enough, you think demons would have loads of special rules. Actually, they tend to have less special rules than a lot of the elite units in other armies. And so they seem to be very static and one dimensional, unfortunately, which happens a lot. And then to your point, and then there are players who just love to play mono factions. And I love it when, like, yeah, I'm all Nurgle or I'm all Zinch, and that's fantastic. But as soon as you do that, you're effectively cutting down your roster potential to a quarter, and there just
Yeah.
simply aren't enough rules and not enough units to make that a very robust list. And so it really punishes you when you don't have benefits. In previous editions,
Yeah.
or we've seen in other versions from GW, like, oh, if you went monofaction, okay, you sacrifice these things, but you get these other things. Again, I think, and that's a challenge for the design team to have enough. Effectively, it's almost like creating four army rosters or five, the mixed and then individual ones all in one army book. That's very ambitious. That's a ton of work. So obviously, that's not there right now. So I think people love demons, and I think our legacy errata and other communities as well, giving them 5+ ward save all the time. We're seeing them on the table now. It makes them competitive enough, but in terms of roster diversity and in terms of special rules, limited special rules, and not having meaningful support for mono faction, and quite frankly, not the combo synergy you'd want to see from the mixed faction, I don't think they rank too high in the fun
Also, can I
factor. I
just
think they
say,
rate
there's like
high in the pain.
9 items that they can get. Like, there's like 10 or so items, especially because they're kind of like different Chaos God locked, and so they can't
Yeah.
get the common magic items. There's no lore familiar. There's no ogre blade. There's not even like you can't take any of that kind of stuff. You can't take power scrolls. So like you're
Good point.
just, oh, I have a wizard. I just roll my spell and I just see what happens.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, in my opinion, I don't know, Evan, if you're feeling differently, they are still can be enjoyable to
Oh
play.
yeah.
But I honestly, I think these are like C tier. I think the demons need improvement.
All right. I think that's where I was gonna put them too.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page on that.
So the dwarves. This is an interesting one because dwarves are
Yeah.
almost stereotypically monotone, but with the Arcane Journal, they've got a few other ways to play. We've already seen a lot of people loving the idea of using your anvil to help you. And anvil plus drilled just means I just get to just run really far across the table very quickly with a
Mhm,
very durable unit. And dwarf units can be very durable because they have some of the
mhm.
best character in unit supported stuff in the game. If you really like the idea of your badass guy walking around with his honor guard of dudes next to him that he's making better automatically without having to like cast a spell and not blow himself up, that's just dwarves. That's just what they do, and
Mhm.
they're very good at doing that. I think that the runes are incredibly unique and just let you go. I want to really build this kind of thing. Like, for example, I was just saying, I
Mhm.
played a game with my Demon Slayer, and I brought it against Andre's Demons of Khorne, and he had a bunch of runes on him that most people wouldn't use because they're not necessarily the meta, but he had like 6 attacks on the charge with like his great weapon that was AP3 or something like that, and I just
Ooh,
it was
spicy,
amazing. And then he
spicy.
missed all of his attacks when he attacked the Bloodthirster.
No!
I met
Oh,
because the
oh
Bloodthirster's weapon
no.
skill 10, and you know what Demon Slayers
Yeah,
don't have? They don't have hatred versus characters that the King does. I don't know
yeah.
why they don't have that, but they
I
don't.
don't know. Well, I don't know. I
But yeah,
guess
other
it's to
than
your
some
point.
disappointments
Yeah.
like the Slayer list being not really workable,
Yeah, but the Slayer list was
like
really a bonus list. And I'd say, right, we have the Grand Army. I'd say the Dwarf Arcane Journal to date is one of the best arcane journals they have released in terms
yeah,
of diversity that provided to the player base. And we see that diversity on the table. I've seen
yeah,
the Expedition Force multiple times. I've seen what's the other one called?
Royal Host,
The Royal Host, thank you. We've
Royal
seen
Clan.
still see that. And dwarves are have always been super popular. They, I think, always will be super popular. They're great models. They're fun.
Mm-hmm.
People love the narrative, the themes, the tones of the dwarves. I think they did a great job with the customization you could do. It's one of
Oh
the most
yeah,
customizable. And to your point, you can make the characters and the units that they're buffing very meaningful, very competitive. And war machines are fun. Again, it's the lack of magic phase is where they typically do less things. The anvil is a lot of fun, but not everyone wants to take an anvil, and that's fine. It's totally fine. But there are limitations inherently there to not having
yeah.
that,
I kind of
and
wish the
they
regular
inherently have less
runesmith was like a
mobility.
wizard, and he could like do one rune like they do in Total War, just a little bit.
They've
Like,
done a lot of different things over the
yeah,
years in different editions, so we'll see what they do in the future. But generally speaking, I think the what they have is great. I think where they're lacking is more options or clever things to do in the magic phase. To your point, like if you gave them abilities like priests, right, who you just do leadership test and cool stuff happens in the magic phase, even though it's not a spell, right? They could go that way in the future. To your point, Evan, or again, they sure would benefit from some goat cavalry or bear cavalry or something else or monsters. I think this is where, right, they don't have the monsters represented, they
oh,
don't have the magic really represented, and they don't really have the mobility
it irks me when
represented
people
because
bring
the
this up.
gyrocopter.
I don't think they need that. What I want them to have transport vehicles. I want them all to pile out of rhinos.
I
40k
didn't
doesn't
say
need
they
the
need that.
rhinos.
I'm just saying, well, you're not
40k doesn't need
well,
rhinos
you brought
anymore.
the
They've
point
got
back.
they've got repulsors and all that stuff. I want the dwarves to be piling out of APCs that are like steampunk powered, and they like
I
come
mean,
behind you and they're like, "We're here to fight."
that sounds that I mean, if the Empire has a steam tank, I don't know why the dwarf can't have their equivalent. But to your point, it's not that they need those things, but they're clearly
Yeah,
lacking some of those categories or depth of the army book that other factions have. And it feels like they're lacking in just too many of those categories. I would love to see them have some representation or some gameplay mechanics to do in some of those other categories, hopefully in the future. But again, they are very fun to play. They're simple to play. They do have a lot of depth, though. Anything else on dwarves before we give them a rank?
very iconic, very very evocative. Like you just know what you're
Yeah.
getting when you're playing dwarves. You're like,
Yep.
I get it, and it really has a lot of verisimilitude. You see it, and it plays the way you think it kind of feels like it should. Whether or not
Hmm.
that's as diverse or as engaging as a very well-rounded roster, it plays the way it kind of looks like it would.
Yeah. And the fortitude and durability you would expect from dwarves definitely comes across.
Yeah, new rules
Super
like
fun.
things like shield wall and stuff like that really feel like they fit. The dwarves
Yep.
amazingly, and of course they have it on everybody. I mean, drilled on dwarves makes perfect sense. They have it on pretty much everything. So
Hmm.
yeah,
It's great. All
all
right.
right,
So,
fun and interesting.
oh,
That's what I'm going with.
straight fun and interesting. Fun and interesting. Uh, I'd say what probably I think that gives them the edge over the Chaos Dwarves is probably the Arcane Journal. I think that's the big deal because we do see that army roster diversity since the Arcane Journal. It's been very successful and that's been continuous. So I think it's fair to put them there. They're definitely not always a good time. I think they lack in some of the other categories of gameplay, keeps them out of that. But definitely, great job on that Arcane Journal. Really fun.
Dark elves. One of my.
Ooh,
I was painting witch elves all weekend, working on them.
because Witch Elves are awesome. That's why.
Yeah.
I love it. So yeah, Dark Elves. This is one of those factions that everyone was shocked was not a core faction, at least for now. Let's see what the future brings us. But evil elves have always been super popular. I've always seen tons of them at the events. Clearly, they did bridge over to AOS and have some capacity again there. But again, it's fairly different how that's morphed in the AOS scene versus the old world scene. I love that we have rules for them. Their book is fairly detailed for a legacy book compared to some of the others. I think where it was lacking is the meta wasn't super strong out of the gate. We have a couple tweaks with our legacy errata to help them be fix a couple things like the murderous rule and some other stuff. But their dragons are super cool. Their magic's super cool. The models are still awesome, or if you get your hands on them, right? And they're very fast and nimble, like their high elf counterparts. I mean, what's been your experience with them?
I think they're very fun. I think that they've got a lot of interesting stuff. So the Cold One Knights are great.
Mhm.
They're very secretly an anvil. Most people think that you're like trying to charge in there and crush people. They're actually just a big stone wall. You sit there and you're like, I got a lot
Mhm.
of Cold Ones attacks. We'll just grind stuff for a while, and I
And
enjoy
good armor.
that. And then on the other hand, you got the Witch Elves who are like, we don't have armor, but we have initiative and we have attacks and we have poison. So this is
Hmm.
fun. This is like the gore, but on hard mode because we're toughness 3.
Hmm.
I like it. I like it a
Yep.
lot. I mean, Frenzy
Yep.
is very difficult to deal with, but the Death Hag is very exciting as a character because it's basically like a dwarf demon slayer I was just telling you about, except she starts at
Yeah.
like 80 points.
Hmm.
And other than like not being
Yep.
toughness 5, but she has all the initiative to just murder you before you do anything to her. So
Yeah, you just got to get her into combat and then off she goes. But they're
yeah,
very mobile. They have shooting, they have magic, they have monsters, they have magic items, they have powerful characters. They really bring a lot to the battlefield.
yeah. I think that there's quite a lot of fun to be had here. I think that the worst ish situations are really that the Charybdis and the Hydra are a little bit
Hmm.
disappointing. In an edition that has so many amazing monsters and people being like, "Oh my god, monsters are running amok." They're some of my favorite monsters, and they're not great for their price. It's one of the main
Yeah.
reasons or it's just classic toughness 5 monster syndrome. There's a lot of other monsters out there that are in that same 200 so price point, 200
Yep.
points price point, and like they're toughness 6 with 6 wounds, and like the Hydra and the Charybdis are like toughness 5 and just like, hello, we're gonna
Yeah,
die
we're just
now.
not
See you
seeing the
later.
battlefield. Yeah, everyone's just going to take the dragon. We're also not seeing the bolt throwers. We're not seeing the
Bolt throwers
chariots, right?
suck, Mike. They are so bad. It is
I
pathetic
didn't
how
say
bad they are.
there's not a
Oh,
reason, but I'm saying like I'd say there's about a third of that army book that, quite frankly, I've just never seen people field them on the table because clearly they started working on this list and then it was a legacy label as a legacy faction, so they stopped working on it. And it's disappointing to your point. Some of those monsters, some of those ranged attacks, some of those war machines, I'd love to see in the battlefield again, but they're going to need some love from GW before we see them again.
yeah. The other thing that's kind of wacky, and I'm gonna talk to you about this later, but all the other elf units can be like 5 men plus, and the
Okay.
dark elves specifically have 10 plus as their like core troops, and it sucks because it would be super great to take little 5 man groups of crossbowmen, but you can't. And if you take 10, that's 120 points of just a unit that'll just get run down by something. It's like so annoying that you can't have little mini squads
It,
in a game
that
that's supposed to
literally
have
just
that.
might be they kept iterating on the army books and they stopped iterating on this and they applied it to the other books and they never went back and applied it to this. It might be just that simple.
Yeah, I personally, I really think so. So I'm gonna say, and by the way, literally, the Black Dragon is also just one of the best mounts in the game because it has
It
the
is.
best breath weapon because it's
Mm-hmm.
strength 4 with no armor save. That is, oh, that's fun. Because people are like, wait,
Uncommon.
it does what? Yeah,
Hmm. No one
that is
expects it.
a
Wait,
lot of
you're
fun.
first of all they confirm. Wait, you're using a breath attack? I didn't know those were in the game still because
Yeah,
nobody uses them anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you can
All
put
right,
the
got to give it a
sorceress
rank though.
on one. That's the other thing that's great. Like in the Wood Elves, you can't do that. So the sorceress on a Black Dragon, great, great pick. Um, oh boy, I kind of think they have to
They're
stay in
not
B
S
though.
tier. Yeah, I don't know that they hit A tier. We're not seeing an arcane journal from them at the moment. They do need some things to be fixed to them, and I will say they are, while super fun, they're incredibly fragile. And I would not say they're a great beginner army either. So I think you need
Well,
to
none of the elf armies are good beginning armies because it's very you basically with elves. In order to play the game, you have to realize that you have to flee from charges constantly, and most people don't do that, and they don't
new,
realize that
well
for a
even
long time.
veterans. So yeah, I think B mostly good. I think is a fair place to put them. Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds very reasonable.
Oh
All right, what
God.
are we down? Empire.
My own
So
personal
this is a
favorite faction, First Army.
controversial one. I think this is if not the most popular one, probably the most one players are frustrated with in the current edition. You have all the units that you would expect to see from before, most of them. You have the vast majority of the roster is back. They have released the models. They did release an arcane journal. I think what's holding people back with this is the Empire is typically it is that combined arms force, but a lot of the infantry you'd want to get out of it. Infantry is not super strong in the meta right now. And I think the biggest thing where Empire is typically it's the baseline. It's always the baseline for how fantasy or old world is based. This is an Empire soldier. Here's his base stat lines. Everything else, and here's his points. Everything else in the game will be bounced relative to that. But it kind of felt like they forgot to give them their special rules or their army faction special rules, and they're a little underperforming in the meta. So people absolutely love them. Again, their war machines are still very powerful. Their wizards and magic are still very powerful. But I think their base stat lines in the units, again, similar to demons, they just are lacking in rules, special rules on the core units, and also the army itself doesn't
Yeah,
have,
and they're not cheap.
special rules. Yeah, it seems like they missed a couple things here. It's like they I think it felt like they intended to come back. Oh yeah, we'll fill in their army special rules later, and then they got busy with something else, and then they forgot to come back to it.
I actually just think that they just didn't realize wow things were going to play when people put it to the test, and people didn't realize that either when they play things. You know, I mean, I know that Empire in a lot of ways was very immediately disappointing. I thought it was disappointing when I looked at my state troop units and I saw that they had like two special rules, close order and detachment. That was it. Um,
Yeah, and to be fair, no one has been officially playing this game for over a decade, basically, since they ended
yeah,
eighth editions, so many years ago. So it's been a long time, right? There's a beta test. So I think I'm really looking forward to. And then the Arcane Journal didn't quite land. Certainly not as strong as the Arcane Journal. There are definitely some fun things in there, but again, they're very skewed lists in there, right? We've seen different versions of Arcane Journals where it's like here's an Arcane Journal and you can play the army totally different, right? And they do that in some of the dwarf stuff, or like with the troll list, right? It's radically different. And sometimes the Arcane Journal is like, hey, this is just a really skew list of the existing list. But usually the skew is, hey, you get a little bit of benefit in something, and then you have these massive penalties, and they clearly the penalties often way outweigh the benefits that you're getting in most of the arcane journals, and I definitely felt that way with the empire lists and such. I think a lot of players feel that way. So I think actually this is one of those examples where um, it's really cool, it's really thematic. People love the army, they love the lore, they love having what state they're from and painting them up, and they're fantastic and they're so cool to put on the battlefield.
yeah.
But I actually think the meta is actually really hurting the fun factor of this army right now.
Well, and it's not just about balance. Like I was saying, Nick's bringing his Knights to the Realm. That's or his his Knights of White Wolf. That's great. But
Yep.
like when I think about Empire, I think about having the state troops and the knights and the artillery and the wizards and the priests. And if you put all that in your
Combined
same
army.
list, you have like because there's so many points. You have like 40 wounds of guys showing up with like two pieces of artillery and like a couple of characters who are all naked, barely supporting each other. And like you just and then like these little units that are like toughness 3 and like 20 guys in it and they just get murdered in their leadership 7. And you're like,
Hmm.
where's the rest of the army? Where are the
Hmm.
and if you compare them to Orcs and Goblins or Beastmen in terms of just what special rules they have for how many points they cost, it's like it's like
Yeah.
you're paying a 25% tax to have no faction rule. It's not that you have cool rules that are really good. You're paying taxes on a rule you don't have.
Yeah. And again, there's different ways to go about viewing this, but effectively these are all just different lenses of
Yeah.
it is one of the weakest competitive armies right now, and I think we are agreeing that there are multiple ways it could be solved, but because it's not solved, it is holding the fun factor back for the Empire player,
Yeah,
and it
and
often
then
leaves
what
you
they
in.
do instead is they play. Okay,
It's frustrating.
I got a bunch of wizards, no general, no priest, just wizards who are flying around by themselves, shooting
Mhm.
rockets as they fly on their Pegasi, and then a bunch of cannons with no one protecting them because I'm just going to shoot until you get to me, and then I don't care. And then a bunch of knights
Yep.
who mostly just run away.
Yeah. Yeah,
That is
that happens a lot.
boring.
Very glass cannon. And I think to your point is the problem is
Ugh.
because that seems to be the only way that you can somewhat compete with that army roster, we're
Yeah,
seeing everybody just take the same thing. And then you're really not seeing the variety because of the bounce of the book. So I think we've said enough about that. I'm not even sure they're mostly good. I honestly I think they're there needs, I wouldn't necessarily say snooze fest, but you are active when you're playing it though, right? Like
So
people who
okay,
are
I'll
playing
bump it up one for one reason. When you play Empire, you're playing a slot machine because you don't win by making good decisions. You win because you got lucky,
it. Mhm.
because your spell went off, because your Hellblaster got 30 shots, because your cannon somehow did 4 wounds to a dragon when it got through all 3 of its saves. That's
Yep.
addictively fun at the time, but you're pulling a slot machine and you just have to hope the entire time.
Yeah, but I'd say it's not a snooze fest though. You are still active in all the phases. You still have lots to do. It's just really hard to compete with the army.
Okay, but the more competitive you try to be, the more I drop it down. Because when you are trying to be hyper competitive and you take 3 level 4 battle wizards who each just have a wizarding wand
Fair.
and a Pegasi, and then you have 3 cannons and 2 hellblasters and a bunch of random knights who are just hoping you never touch them
We're,
and I just want to run away.
we're demi grips. I think we see two types of Empire players. We see people who just love the Empire and just want to show up to the Empire, and they still bring their combined arms forces, and they're going to lose most of the games, but they're going to have a fun time playing their
Yeah,
Empire army because they love the army, right?
yeah.
And I think those players are definitely having more fun. Then you have people who are trying to make it competitive, and they are going to those lists, and I think they are definitely having less fun. All right, let's move on.
High elves are my second favorite, and then the
Now it's
other army
interesting
have
because when
5,000
High
points of.
Elves first came out in Old World, a year or whatever ago, everyone was really down on them and was really critical of them, and people weren't playing them, and people were not jazzed by the rules. But as we've seen over the last year, more and more people are learning how to play this game better. They're learning the ins and outs. In fact, even in our local community and other communities, we've seen players excelling with High Elves, with a lot of different tactics and strategy and
Mhm.
such. That being said, the high elf players, the people who are winning the events, are doing really well. They're having a good time, but their army lists are typically around controlling the battlefield, and often their opponent feels like they are only not fully playing the game because they're so under the control of the high elf player. And so I think the high elf players are still having a good time. I'm not sure the opponent is having as much fun.
So with high elves, you are very much when you're winning, the other person's like, "How could I do anything against that?" And when you're losing, it's like all of the wheels fell off the car and then it hit a tree. Um, it's very much a glass cannon, knife's edge army. You have to make all of the right decisions. It's much more close combat oriented than Wood Elves, but it is just as fragile in so many ways. When
Mhm.
Phoenix Guard is like a 17-point model and he only has a 6 up ward sometimes, you're like, oh my god, how do I do anything? And I think most of the plays that you have to do are basically I have to flee a lot because if I'm not striking before you in combat, I have to run away because no matter what damage you do to me, I'll lose more points in that combat than you will. So I have to try to manufacture situations and do a lot of initiative math in my head to be like, okay, this situation I'm fine with, or that situation I can't avoid it, or something like that all the time. And it's a lot of fun. It's very high skill ceiling. That's what it is. It's high skill ceiling. Bretonnia is much simpler to play. It's much more straightforward. You just run and smash things. High Elves is taking a lot of effort on the effort of the player to do it, and when that high skill player is doing it, it looks like artwork to do,
Mhm.
and you will
It's
learn a
totally
lot
fair.
playing against it.
Yeah, but will the but I don't think when it's being played by that really high skilled opponent, um, can be a little not as engaging for the opponent. When you're running away from all the things, you are able to control what's getting into combat, and you are typically able to surgically remove the major threats. It can be challenging, in particular if you don't have range, because a lot of the armies don't have a lot of ranged attacks in the game, spells or war machines or shooting weapons and such. And so it's if the high elf player doesn't want to be caught, it's near impossible to catch them. And so that can be a frustrating experience.
Yeah, I played a game once as the Vampire Counts against Eric, who's ranked number 5 in the U.S. With High Elves, and we had a very long, I think it was 4.5 hour game of mostly not touching each other because I couldn't really get to him, and he couldn't get into combat with me without losing. So he knew that he was just trying to wait for a situation to show up, basically,
Yep.
and that was just hours of us slowly positioning, not doing anything. And most people might not find that very interesting, but it's very engaging mentally. So I have to like my personal bias is I'm going to say fun and interesting, but I think on average most people it will be bumped down a bit because for one thing it's really hard to play without a dragon because you need one to guard your very vulnerable units against destruction. It's not just about like with Bretonnia having a Peg Knight brick that runs in and kills everything. You need a dragon defensively. You need to put it in front of other units that are way too vulnerable and way too many points for your opponent to be killing that you are then defending with it, right?
Hmm.
I find that interesting,
Yeah.
but most people might not.
Yeah. So it is interesting there. So again, I think for the skilled player, the high elf army definitely gets that A tier. But I think for both players, in terms of fun factor, I think it could fall down into the B tier for sure.
Also, when they beat you, the other person will a lot of time be like, ah, dragons are overpowered. And they don't realize that knife's edge gameplay you were doing the entire time, where a single failed charge, a single failed leadership check, and all of my toughness 3 units just start evaporating into dust. And then I actually lost by 400 victory points, even though a couple turns ago you thought the game was over.
Yeah, but I think that's the big thing too. Also, the armies are very elite and small, so not all of the things are typically dying too. So the perception can get skewed pretty easily. All right, moving on. Lizardmen. Ooh, these are fun. So I think Lizardmen, again, people were shocked that this was a legacy faction. Hopefully, in the future, it will become core. Who knows what the future will bring us for Old World? But people have always loved Lizardmen. I mean, it's dinosaurs. And in fact, it's dinosaurs riding dinosaurs with more dinosaurs. I mean, it's just like a winning combo there. They have combat, they have range, they have melee, they have skirmishing, they have spells, they have monsters. They really have it all. What they didn't have was complete slaying rules, and some other things in terms of the legacy faction. I know we've addressed this with our errata, our legacy errata, where we specifically made it so that you can take the slant of the unit and make it competitive again, or at least competitive enough, fix things that were clearly meant to be fixed that GW stopped working on because it was legacy faction. Other communities have addressed this as well, and since doing that, we're seeing Lizardmen start to show up again, which is fantastic. But they still have some challenges.
Yeah, they're one of their challenges is basically their internal balance is completely askew. You've got regular skinks who are very cheap for having a bunch of poison arrows that they can shoot, but they don't have evasive or fire and flee or anything. So like, if they just get charged, they just have to try to flee and run away, or they just start getting killed and overran one unit into another into another. And so if you bring 100 skinks in your core and that's it, it's not enough, and you have to get really close to be able to shoot at people. And if they can just charge you right after, it's not going to go too well. Like,
No.
so I think that then the thing that I'm really missing here is this. I really want the idea to be I've got these really tough, durable bricks of Saros who are elite infantry, and they're being supported by their skirmishers, and they're able to kind of pass in and out. So that let's say you had a bunch of skinks who could then flee and fall back through the Saros and then rally and then come back at you again, and that doesn't really work. For one, they're kind of slow, and then on the other hand, because the Saros are weapons go 3, they can very easily get massacred by a lot of things that charge them in the front.
Hmm.
And I think that weapons go 3 versus weapons go 4 breakpoint is massive. It's the same thing in ogres. It really means that your frontline troops just can't sit there and get charged. If they do, they just
Hmm.
get screwed. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm personally, I don't find them very exciting to build lists for at all, but most Lizardman players seem mostly optimistic about it.
Hmm. I think it's still a little early, seeing players adapting to the legacy errata, right, and see how that's
Yes.
going to affect them with that. Um, I don't know that they're in the needs improvement though, because they definitely can hit harder. They definitely, I think, have more things to do and play in all the different fields than some of the other, right. Comparing our, now that we're starting to get more of the board filled out, um, my instinct is to put them in the B tier rather than the needs improvement tier, or at least we need to see how
Yeah,
it
I think I'm
plays
just really
out.
biased
I
because, for example, if you're trying to say that Lizardmen are similar in excitement to High Elves, for me, I'm just like that could not be further apart. But if we're talking about what most other people would feel, I guess that's where it would be.
Well, again, we might raise high elves up, right? We're going to do a
Yeah.
first pass here, and then we're going to see the board, and
Okay.
we're
Okay.
probably going to raise some things and lower some things, right? So first we're reviewing it in isolation, and now that the board's filling out, Evan, right, we'll make some adjustments. So don't worry, these are not set in stone statements. This is just first blush.
Okay. Ogres. I
Yeah,
recently, I think it was January, where I was just like, I'm gonna get an ogre army, and then it just
yeah,
happened.
because ogres are awesome. Mm-hmm.
um, Ogres are a lot of fun to play. They
Mm-hmm.
have a very narrow band of army lists that you can make work. because for one, they think the core section is very simplistic. There's not a lot of, like, for example, there's no unit of archers or skirmishers that are in core that are like, your actual regular frontline ogres.
Mhm,
I think
mhm.
like if lead belchers were core, it would help because you'd have a little more of like a, well, if I wanted a little more of a skirmishy army with some shooting, then they could be in there. But because you just have ogre bulls and iron guts as your like main frontline ogre core, and again,
Mhm.
it's called Ogre Kingdoms, not Nobbler Kingdoms, so I don't know if I care that much
That's
about
right.
them. You don't have a lot to do with
But
that part, and then I
yeah,
don't love the core part.
but they have the Yetis. They have the characters. They have the monsters. They can be
Yeah,
fast.
yeah. The
They
rest of the
definitely
roster's
have
fun.
some great war machines with the cannon. They have what are
I
the
love the
cavalry
Thunder
called?
Tusk
Warfang?
Riders because
The
the
Thunder
Thunder
Riders.
Tusk Riders can get two harpoons up there, which don't kill you
Mhm.
when you roll a misfire like the cannon does. And then you have
Yep.
a couple of nice bolt thrower shots where they're like, wait, you can hit a bolt thrower from a large target, and
Yeah.
they just, yeah.
hmm
And then you just,
And ogres, again, when ogres are on the battlefield, like things are going to die. Lots of them on both sides. I mean, my experience
yeah,
generally seeing, I see players having fun playing ogres, and I mean, no, they're not the most meta competitive, and that's okay. But they're fun. They're thematic. They play the way you expect them to play. They feel like that monstrous infantry army. They have magic. They have shooting. They can hit very hard. They have durability. I think there's a lot going on for ogres. Um, I generally see both players having a really good time playing ogres. I mean,
yeah.
I would tend to put them in the A tier. People are always having fun. I've never seen someone say, "Oh no, I'm having to play ogres." Never seen that. People
Yeah,
like
if
playing
if
ogres.
you're talking about it from the sense of what do people think when they're playing against it, because a lot of people will see a high elf dragon and say, "Oh God, I got to play against a dragon again." And again, I look at the tournament scene and it's like we had like 15 players at the May RTT, and like there were like three dragons and one of the
Hmm
something or three players. But anyway, I think you're right. People will be more excited to play against the ogres, and when you're playing as them, I know that when I get my tyrant with tenderizer to roll his 6 attacks, I'm always happy about that. Always
So
excited.
cool. Yeah, ogres are great. Again, we're rating this on fun factor,
Yeah,
not on meta factor. And I
yeah,
think ogres
pretty
are a
fun.
lot of fun. They really are. Absolutely.
Also, iron guts are
Orc
overrated.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're not wrong. Let's move on to that. Orcs and Goblins. I mean, okay, so this is going to be a hard one to convince me that's not an S tier list for fun factor. They have one of the most robust options. They have so many different units they could put on the battlefield. They got a really great arcane journal with some great variety. They have tons of magic items. They have tons of personality. They're fun to play. Typically, the Orcs and Goblin players are typically the loudest or the most fun. Not always, but generally
Yes.
speaking, Orcs and Goblin players are a lot of fun in particular. And you have the random factor. If you just want to go with like fanatics or squigs or other things and just like,
Yes.
let's see what the dice do,
Yes.
they're great to play. Or you just want to field giants. Or you want to field orcs, or you want to field orcs on wyverns, or you want to field black orcs, or like there's just so many things. I think the biggest problem the orcs have is they have such a robust roster, and I think we don't even see half of the roster actually on the battlefield because there's just so many units. And but the difference is we don't see just one orc and goblins list. Like we see troll hordes list, we see night goblin list, we see orc list, we see combined arms list, we see a lot of different orc lists. So despite half of the roster still not typically being on the battlefield
Yeah.
because of internal balance, there's still a ton of variety out there, and they got some great spells too.
Yeah. Highlight of the last tournament was when Jonathan cast Foot of Gork, and then it immediately decided to scatter directly back at the wizard and kill the wizard who cast it. That was amazing. Loved it. Perfect.
So
Perfect
good.
that that happened.
Yeah.
You know
And he
that it's
still
the
won the game.
only. Every other random moving vortex doesn't hurt friendlies. It's only Foot of Gork that says, yeah, we move randomly and we can hurt you. Most of the other
Well,
random
because
ones can't hurt friendly units.
right. And when are you playing? Typically, right, you're playing an orc player and he's rolling for the fanatic. Both players are playing the game when he rolls for the fanatic because you're both saying, please go towards the other person. Please randomize towards the other person. Right. To me, they're pretty obvious, always having a good time for both players. I love the Orcs and Goblins list.
Definitely. Definitely. And then we can come
Skaven,
down
this
from
is
our
more
high and talk
pricey.
about how Skaven are the opposite of
Well,
that.
again, we are reviewing Skaven from the Legacy errata, where they got
Yes.
some love, right? Because we're not viewing them. We all know that the Legacy faction out of the gate for Skaven was one of the weakest factions in the book and had a lot of mechanics that just quite frankly didn't work as intended. Clearly, they were working on this list. They had to put it down because it was like dubbed Legacy, and they had to go work on other things. But since then, our community and other communities have given them some love to make the Warp Fire Lightning Cannon work better, to make the war machines be able to go into units and different things. And we've seen, and despite all that, even before, we see a lot of Skaven players in our community.
That's
Honestly,
true.
every event has at least two,
Yeah.
sometimes more.
Yeah, and I have a big Skaven army that's very recently put on the bright bases, but still has not left the box.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that. The reason is
Oh,
that I liked Skaven for the same reason that a lot of people like playing Orcs and Goblins, because they had a lot of randomness, a lot of fun action, and hilarity that would happen during the game. There would be Crack's Call, there would be the dreaded 13 spell, there would be Skaven slaves running and fleeing and rallying and bouncing through people. There would be the Doom Rocket, and you'd roll it and it would just go flying off in a wild direction. And there's just none of that. There's no shooting into combat. There is no Doom Rocket. There are no fun random items. The Fell Blade is the worst magic item in the game. Quote me.
it's pretty rough. Uh, yeah, so I think that to your point, yeah, it is interesting that they have most of the units from before. They have most of the representation. They have the different clans represented. They have rules. They have special rules. They
They're
have a lot
missing
of
all the
mechanics.
mounts
But
for the melee characters. They used to have the War Litter, which
that's
was
true.
like two Skaven who carried you on a stick. There was the Plague Rat. There was a big, perfect for
But
old
I
world
don't
Monsters Cavalry Rat, right? So
But
they're
I don't think
missing.
that that's the fun factor, though. I think to your point, Evan, I think you've hit the nail on the head. The What was a major fun factor and appeal for players in previous editions that is lacking in this edition is the random factor. Like the orcs still retained it to a degree with some of their spells, certainly with fanatics, certainly with their random movers. There's less random now with orcs than there used to be, but with Skaven, most of it is gone, and people clearly miss it. They miss it a lot.
Yeah, no shooting into combat. Deal breaker. That's just
Yeah.
that's the funnest thing. I want that to happen.
Well, warp lightning cannon, but that's
Yeah, no,
different.
I want my warp fire cannons to do that. The
I
warp.
know, and your rattling guns and everything else. I totally get it. So let's give the Skaven a rate for right where they are today. Even though, oh man, rough, rough. Okay,
Also, it's
I
not
mean,
just that they don't have a lot of interesting things going on. Their units are so expensive that by the time you put in some fun stuff in there, you're like, wait, I'm out. I'm out of points. I'm done.
yeah. But it is interesting that even with that, and even though they're not as competitive, we still see a lot more Skaven players in the community than we do Demon players. And in fact, we see on
That's
average
true.
just as many Skaven players as Empire players often at the events.
That is very
So
true.
something to keep in mind.
And that's because people love the faction enough to show up.
Yes, they absolutely love the faction.
I love
All
the
right.
seventh edition rulebook for the faction, I guess, and not the faction.
Well, again, there's always the future, right? I am confident GW is going to bring back some legacy factions or upgrade them back to core in the future. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I'm very confident they're going to do it, and we're going to just see Old World keep growing. Tomb Kings.
Tomb Kings, um, very deep roster of tons of
Mm-hmm.
very powerful, very interesting things. I really love the My Will Be Done rule that the kings and the princes have. That is
Mm-hmm.
so cool. I wish that Empire characters could do something like that, where they're like, "Hey, you guys over there, keep your shields together. Let's get them." Like, no, we don't do that. That's it. You guys,
Yeah.
you're on
Well,
your own. You're screwed.
we've seen the evolution of this rules over the years
I
from
love it.
they
It's
had
great.
it originally in Tomb Kings back in the day, and then you saw it evolve, actually not with Tomb Kings because fantasy wasn't a thing for a while. You saw it evolve in 40K with Imperial Guard, and
Yes,
then they come
exactly.
up to the old world, and we've seen the continuation of that rule set, and it's a really fun rule set. But to your point, they have great models, they have beautiful new models. Again, the other starter set of the box, they were never competitive in previous editions. They are one of the strongest competitive armies in the current edition. The Bone Dragon, the pictures don't do it justice, in my opinion. Seeing it in person, it's a badass model in person. The picture, I think that they just gave bad pictures. It's so cool. They're super fun. They're super thematic. They're very old world. They didn't make over the transition to AOS, so they're very, part of this universe. And they were very They're still popular. I don't think we've had an event yet where there hasn't been at least one, if not two, Tomb Kings players. And we do see some list variety, right? We see people that do the
Yeah.
Monster Mash. We've seen people who've focused on chariots. The last event, we saw someone have a Cetra build. That was super cool. We've seen the whole shooty focus build, very skew, right? With the archers and the Ushapti and the arc and such and all that. So yeah, it is. There's a lot of variety. They got a lot going for them. I think. That being said, for the other player, it can, because they're so strong in the meta right now, it can be, if wielded properly by a skilled player, it can feel a bit oppressive, because they're very, very strong.
Yeah, I think that their healing isn't quite as strong as the vampire counts, but it still is there. And then you've got,
Mhm.
things like the bow. I think that the arrows of Asaph, particularly, the fact that they ignore. If I have a magic item that makes me -1 hit with shooting, the Tomb King goes, ha, my rule says I don't care about that. I think that's really too much. I think they should ignore all of the minuses to hit from the core rulebook and not ignore all the minuses to hit from, like, I'm wearing a magic pendant that says it's harder to hit me. That's just BS.
Maybe, but at the same time, if they, their ballistic skill is very low, so if they didn't have that special rule, then the shooting itself would, like, most shooting in old world right now that's ballistic skill based is very bad. The only exception to that is some of the elf shooting, but for the rest of all the other factions, ballistic skill shooting is very weak in the meta right now because of all the penalties. Tomb Kings is one of those exceptions because they ignore it. So not arguing that, maybe there are some ways to tweak those rules to make them a little bit more fun.
But what I'm saying, there's less
Again,
engaging.
on the
There's no
other
way to
side,
engage with them. If they shoot you, actually no,
right,
there's
there's no
one
defense
way to
against it.
engage with Tomb King shooting you, and it's the new Wood Elf spell that makes them re-roll sixes to hit because they don't take
Yeah.
pluses and minuses, but they could re-roll to hit potentially.
Yeah,
So
but I think to your
that's
point,
it.
that's right. They can have an overwhelming amount of shooting, and you can't hide behind cover. It's hard to deal with it. The best way to deal with it is just have incredibly fast army that can close ground with the enemy before they can shoot you too much. But so they're still very, very good though. But again, I think because they are a little bit too strong on the meta, I think that knocks them out of S tier in my mind.
I think it makes sense. Yeah, I think that if they were a bit more well-rounded, and if the other person could engage a bit more, and for example, if there was a better way to help deny the healing, for example, I mean, the fact that it's a leadership test, really cool, but there's no real way to affect that. It used to be a spell that you could dispel, like with your dispel dice, but now since it's just a command phase leadership test, there's not really a lot of ways to try to make it so the other person doesn't just heal everything you just like if I shoot a bunch of
Yeah,
arrows at you
that doesn't
and you just
bother me
heal
too
all of it,
much.
it's like, why did I shoot those arrows?
I think part of the problem is, again, the mortuary cult can really buff it out of there. So it's interesting. It's almost the opposite of the Empire, where the weakness of the current meta of the Empire is keeping it out of some of the higher fun factors. And I think the Tomb Kings are for the opponent, because it's so competitive, is not letting it, not getting the fun factor as high as it could be for both players.
All right, so vampire counts, very similar situation
Ooh.
because they're also undead.
Hmm.
They have screams, which have a lot of counters. For example, they're very short range. But again, a lot of people, at the very least at first, find that very frustrating to deal with. Um, I find it a little bit annoying that the vampire counts list is a bit less well-rounded on the internal balance because if you're trying to run the more vampire lord focus, it's a little bit like you're kind of making yourself weaker than if you just ran all necromancers. I think that we helped that with the legacy pack a bit. But at the same
Yep.
time, vampire counts are a bit of a weird list because they don't have the same diversity of core units that the Tomb Kings have with like
Well,
chariots and horse archers. They just have like
They 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 do and they don't. The interesting
yeah.
thing about, because I've loved vampires, I've played them for forever, but I think they actually have a similar but different problem, where they actually have a ton of diversity in the roster because the internal balance is so poor that that effectively, versus you have a similar problem to almost demons did, where hey, I want to make a ghoul or ghast focus list, or I want to make a ghost or wraith focus list, or I want to make, you used to be able to do this quite a bit. I want to make an all vampire list, right? Or I want to make a beast list. Like, you just can't right now with vampire counts because of the way it's built, the way it's structured, and the way it's balanced. That you have to go combined arms with vampire. And again, they also, for the most part, they do have some shooting with the whales, and the whales are really, really fun when they work. But at the same time, you can go into some armies that just hard counter it, such as if you're playing the Bretonians, where they have the arcane journal where the whole army is veteran and they get to reroll all the leadership tests. You're going to be lucky if you kill even a handful of models in that game because of just the inherent rerolls and the high leadership of the army. So you can get hard, just if you go all screams, it's hard skew. And also at the same time, if you go hard skew and all screams and your opponent has no defense against it, holy crap, the game just falls apart so quickly because it can be so powerful. So I think that's my problem with the screams is they are very skewed. They're either do nothing or they do way too much, right, in terms of the balance. And again, they suffer from not a ton of list variety. Again, you pretty much we've seen the meta solved in many ways where it's really about the mortis. Either you're going all skew scream list right now, or you're going with the mortis engine, the necromancer, right, and such. But at the same time, it can feel like a very passive list because they don't have ranged attacks, and their monsters are typically it's hard to beat the vampire on a dragon, right? And that's pretty much what you do because the other monsters, the way they're points, or it just doesn't compete. And there's so many, ghosts, wraiths, hex wraiths, even black knights. We just see the blood knights. We just see so few of the actual roster on the battlefield, which is disappointing.
Yeah, and having the Graveguard in core is a really powerful effect, a really powerful unit. That also means that you don't see a lot of the other actual core units there. And then
Yeah,
Undead compound this problem by saying, hey, I can heal, so try to make it so that you just have as big a unit as possible so the unit never gets to 0 men so I can still heal all the way back, right? So
yeah.
it just means that
It's
you
a war
kind
of
of end up
attrition.
wanting to have a couple of massive units and then that's it. Like I have my little vampire counts list that I'm working on right now has 10 blood knights, 28 graveguard, 2 units of 20 zombies, and everything in characters. That's it.
Yeah,
And I'm just looking
and
at
I
it
think it
like that's barely
definitely.
anything. What
Yeah,
happened?
you're not really getting the horde from before. The only way to get it is with this, and then the way it's balanced right now is there's just no reason to take skeletons. You either take zombies or you take graveguard. It's one way or the
They
other.
can have
So
banners,
don't
but
get
they
me wrong.
cost twice as much. They got magic banners and they can
I
have champions, but they cost twice as many
and
points as a
but,
zombie.
but they still do nothing in combat, and they also don't survive because their armor isn't weak enough or strong enough. So don't get me wrong. I love vampires. They're so thematic. They're super fun to paint. They're so ingrained into old world. They're legacy factions now, but I'm confident they're going to come back in the future. I absolutely love them. They're still very popular. We still see them all the time. We see a lot less of them now, actually. We saw a ton of them at first were people who just loved vampire counts. We saw a ton of them were people who were doing scream list. But once the meta and the community learned how to counter the scream list, we've seen very few vampire accounts compared to we used to see so many of them. So it's actually disappointing that people have moved generally in our community have moved on to other lists because of that. So I love vampires. They're definitely not S tier. I think they're not A tier. They're just too restrictive and too skew. Um, they are hovering between a B and a C tier, and I'm torn where to put them.
I think they're more exciting to play than Lizardmen. So I can't put them in C and
That's
have
fair,
Lizardmen
and
D
they're
and D.
definitely more exciting than yeah, they're definitely more interesting than Empire and Demons. So, and again, we can move stuff later. So,
Okay.
all right, two more.
Yes. Warriors of Chaos. This one's tough because in some ways they're really one note. They run at you and then they fight you in combat. But
Hmm.
in other ways, they have a really diverse roster. They've got very powerful units like kind of like the dragon ogres and the monsters. They've got the gigantic chaos spawns that are they got random movement. That's kind of fun, and they got the different marks you can put on every individual unit. That's tons of customization. You got these very
They
powerful
do have
wizards with kind
monsters.
of their more signature spells than pretty much any other factions. They've got like four of them, right?
Hmm.
And then they've got the super elite core infantry, like the Chaos Warriors, and then they got Chaos Knights, and then Chosen Knights, who are just like a surgical precision tool of just murder and destruction.
Hmm.
Where I think that they've got a lot of fun things to do, but at the same time, that it's not like they have like shooting because their Hell Cannon is the worst artillery in the game, so
Yeah.
that doesn't really
Besides
exist.
magic missile shooting, they have
Yeah,
no ranged attacks. They have no war machines. They can be somewhat mobile, but they're not as mobile. But to your point, Evan's point, they are mostly one tone. They're going to run across the battlefield and punch you in the face as fast and hard as they can. And that can be really, really fun. Um, and it definitely is overwhelm the opponent. There's too many powerful things coming at me too fast. I think my biggest problem with the chaos list and the fun factor right now is just the Chaos Lord or the Chaos Dragon is the most powerful thing in the game, and everybody just takes it as an auto take, and that's so many points of the roster. And between him and like the Dragon Ogres, the internal balance again is very off on this army book, in my opinion. And in fact, that character on that dragon is the most powerful thing in the game. That we don't see a lot of list variety, quite frankly. I think there are a lot of units, there are a lot of potential, but because the internal balance is so skew, We're seeing very, very similar lists, and I think we're getting to the point where people are now having to learn how to deal with those lists because they're so used to seeing them all the time. And now the chaos players are like, well, if my chaos lord on dragon isn't going to work, and my dragon ogres, people learn how to deal with it, and they're going to other things like giant chaos spawns. But again, the magic with your sorcerer lords is not going to typically win you the game. It's supplemental. It's not enough, and it is a very strong list, but we're finding that the veteran players are able to counter it fairly consistently at this point, and that's interesting to see how that's
It's
playing.
still more interesting than Bretonnia because you have most of these units do have arcs of sight you need to worry about, like the dragon. Whereas with the Pegasus Knights, you can just not even care where you end up because all you can just charge
Mm-hmm.
18 inches in any direction. Whereas the dragon has to
Yep.
be very careful with right positions. You have to set things up like, okay, can I Arcane Agency the dragon to get to a better spot? Um, you do have chosen knights who, if you're running them, they require a lot more effort because they have a lot less
Mm-hmm.
wounds than dragon ogres. Dragon ogres are mostly just you buy them and you just run forward and see what happens. Chosen knights are more of a surgical implement. So I would say they're mostly good.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
they're
that's fair.
similar to vampire counts in the sense that they kind of have just one note thing they do, and they have a lot of
Yeah.
ways to do that same thing.
Yep. I think that they way over index on one thing. I really wish their roster provided more mechanical offerings to the chaos player.
In a way, they have tons of offerings in terms of the marks and the items and stuff that don't
But they're
provide a lot of
still
different
mostly just
play.
helping you punch things in the face better or faster. They're not really creating. And again, their arcane journal honestly was one of the weakest ones. The Wolves of the
Yeah.
Sea is fun, but it's
Well,
yeah,
I think
could
they
be better.
they and High Elves are two of the factions in the game that really show that one of the things that really sucks is if you're a really expensive infantry model and you're trying to rely on having really high weapon skill, that doesn't keep you alive. Because if I'm weapon skill
No,
5 or 6, like chosen, if I'm chosen infantry weapon skill 5, cool. But the other guy who has weapon skill 3 still hits me on a 4 plus with all of his attacks and murders me before I get to swing, right?
yeah,
The,
this edition of the game, yeah.
and whereas the Beastmen, they can have like a unit of Bestigor who weapons go force. They're not even as cool, but they can just have a guy in there with slug skin to give them -1 to hit. Whereas the Warriors
Hmm.
of Chaos are like, nah, we're just weapon skill 5, but it's not harder to hit me, so just murder me just as hard, please. Thank you.
All right, one more. Wood Elves. This one, oh boy, we saw a ton of them at first. People love the Wood Elves, always have loved the Wood Elves, and then they kind of disappeared in our community for a long time. And then they got hit with a pretty bad nerf bat. And then people are starting to dabble with them coming back. We'll see when the models come out. I think we're going to see them on the table field again. We'll see if the Arcane Journal gives them any lease on life. But I think the biggest thing is right the nerf bat to the Sisters of the Thorn taken away because everyone realized, oh wow, that mechanic's broken. I'm going to clearly abuse the heck out of that. And that was very effective and also not fun. But I think the biggest reason we saw a ton of people, certainly in our community, and I bet you the same in a bunch of other communities, is they love playing Wood Elves, but the Wood Elves inherently are a non engaging army. They are, don't touch me. I'm a glass cannon. Stay away from me. And I'm going to shoot you and whittle you down. And I'm going to make it so you can never catch me, which a lot of armies really struggle to catch them. And effectively, what happens is the Wood Elf player is having some fun, and then the opponent is having no fun
Well,
whatsoever,
when
and
they're playing
actually
the Pillar of Fire list, where not only are they not getting close to you, but at the same time
brutal.
they're out of dispel range and walking little pillars that just murder all of your men every single turn that you
Mhm.
can't get rid of.
Yeah.
That
So
that
people,
was
I
the
think that's
worst,
why
most
people
unfun thing, I think.
stop bringing it because again, this is a social
Yeah,
game. It's not about how much fun you're having. How much fun are you and your opponent having together? Because
yeah.
it's not about that game. It's about the next game and one the next game and the next game and wanting to build this community, come back and make friends. So I think Wood Elves, their initial design was off, and created a disengaging army and not a fun two-player experience, which was unfortunate.
Well, so and if you try to take bigger units or just more or just stand your ground and don't just run away, you kind of just get murdered because everything doesn't have any
Hmm.
armor and it's all toughness 3
Yeah.
elves. And I am very excited to play them and to get more involved in playing them because I have more things I want to try to do. Almost every single Wood Elf army I've ever seen anyone play is nothing but shooting. They don't take any of the
Hmm.
melee units and then they say, oh wow, all my guys got killed. Or I stayed away all game and I'm fine. But like, if you actually do take a combined arms list and you're playing someone who isn't one of the top metas in armies in the game, it is interesting to see like the war dancers because the war dancers are like a super interesting unit at certain things that they can do. like being able to charge in, have strikes first, and have a million attacks, and they just absolutely shred certain types of
I
units.
think you're right, Evan. I think
Yeah,
we saw the same type of player behavior that we saw with the High Elves at first, where the High Elves at first people were like, "Oh no, this is no good. This is super weak. I'm not going to play it." And then veteran players learned how to play the game and figured out, "Oh, actually, High Elves have a ton of play," and they got really good at it and they mastered it. And all of a sudden, High Elves are winning a bunch of events. I think Wood Elves suffered from everyone's like, "Well, the shooting and evasive tactics in this book and those spells are so OP. I'm not even going to look at anything else in the book. I'm not even going to consider a combined arms force." So I think now that we've kind of passed that phase and that kind of
yeah,
bugaboo and the Arcane Journal coming out, I think there's a ton of untapped potential in the Wood Elf army list that we just haven't seen players really experiment with. So I'm hoping the
right.
release of the awesome models coming out, and I'm hoping the Arcane Journal is going to reignite the community to find that combined arms list. And hopefully they're going to create not just a fun list for them to play, a more interesting list that plays in more phases of the game, but I bet you it's going to be a list that their opponent has a lot more fun playing against as well.
Yeah, I think that if we're just judging this off of the pre-Arcane Journal release, because again, even if you've seen the leaks and you already know the rules of it, we don't know what kinds of things that means for players when they play dozens of games with it, when they actually show up with real models that they chose to buy and paint. You know, because
Too
for
early.
example, taking a bunch of beast packs, that sounds really, really strong. Is anyone going to buy several $100s of decades-old metal models to take that meta army? I don't know. And that's something you have to wait
Mm.
and see on whether people actually play it in real life. I
Well, they
think that if we
proxy it
judge
with
it,
other models.
yeah, I think that if we judge it based on where it's at right now, and the fact that we just don't see a lot of people bring them, that they have to be in C, but it very easily could jump up after I've tried it out a little while. More people get more excited and interested into it. New players who just don't have the models currently want to buy into it and then try it out. And you can just figure it out from there, right?
Yeah, definitely punching. All right, so we've gotten to the end of this. Now we have one last attempt, Evan, to mix everything around. Now that we filled out the board, what's standing out to you? Is there anything that you're like, hey, that really should be one tier above, or that thing should be one tier below?
I think the high elves should go up because I think they are very
Yeah.
fun and interesting to play as, and that's kind of where I've been going for this whole time. That they are engaging and interesting. They've got a lot of different kinds of builds you can play. The Arcane Journal brought you, a very trace themed list where I bring white lines as my core units, and I've got
Hmm.
some chariots
Hmm.
backing them up. And even just for example the high magic, using the high magic the lore and is very unique. It's just them and lizardmen that get access to it, so it feels like kind of almost like your own thing.
Hmm.
And I really like, for example, having shadow warriors with feign flight. That's it. So I'm just discovering new little tools all the time. It feels like a tool chest with a lot of tools in
It's
it.
very deep. It's very deep. Yep, that makes sense to me. Um, I don't think anything else is really popping out to me, and I also don't want this video to go any longer than we needed to go. This is already quite an in-depth, fun review tier list than before. So at the moment, right, S tier, always good time. Beastmen and Orcs and Goblins. I think most players will agree with that. They're just fun for both players on both sides. Really robust list. Exciting to see them up there. On the A tier, definitely very popular. The Dwarves and the Great Arcane Journal. Ogres are generally a good time for both players. Yeah, they're not the most meta competitive list, but they're just good fun. Tomb Kings are super fun, super diverse. So glad to see them competitive for the first time ever.
I know,
But I
right?
actually think GW overtuned the competitiveness. And I think that's actually the reason what's keeping them at S tier is because they're a little bit too powerful right now. High Elves, of course, super fun, as Evan just said. I think it's reasonable to make a case for them in A tier, but it is a high learning curve. So it's not a great entry level army. You need to definitely get your rules down and learn how to run away in order to be competitive and have fun with the High Elves. Mostly good. B tier, right? Chaos Dwarves, Dark Elves, Lizardmen, Vampire Counts, Warriors of Chaos. I think the legacy factions all have, again, their bugaboos that they just didn't get as much love and time that I think could have easily raised them into the A tier. And Warriors of Chaos, again, feel very one tone, and they really double down on that one tone, which is keeping them out of that tier.
Yeah,
Right? C tier, Bretonians, Demons, Empire, Wood Elves, right? We went through each of them. They hauled the bugaboos. Bretonians are actually not just really competitive, they're and so competitive, but they're just one tone in terms of the way they're playing on the battlefield right now. I think with a few tweaks and toning down the Pegasus Knights and adding a few more mechanics to the army roster, because again, it's a very limited offering of the units you could take. I'd love to see Bretonians actually raise. I think they could easily get into the B tier just through some balance updates, and hopefully next edition we'll see some new units added to the roster or new arcane journals that can also add some more spice to their life. Demons we talked about, problems with the mono factions, problem with the combined armed forces, just creating the synergy. Love the models, love to paint them. There's some synergy faction army construction problems. Empire, they're on the weaker side, and their lacking of special rules is what's keeping them out of the higher tiers. So it's going to be an uphill battle with the Empire list. And Wood Elves, as we said, it can be very one-sided what's keeping them in terms of their fun factor out of that. But again, hopefully the Arcane Journal, we're going to see that increase going forward. And Skaven, we love Skaven so much. We see Skaven at every event. We've done some little help with our Legacy errata to make them a little bit more fun, but a lot of the fun factor, the pure fun factor, the random factor, the unknown, the unexpected, the crazy, wacky stuff that Skaven were so well known for are just lacking in this edition, which is very disappointing, which is what keeps them at the bottom there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. I think we got to the end of this video. So if you made it this far, please do like, share, and subscribe. And Evan, any last words before we close this one out?
Easy. Stay legendary.
All right. We'll see you next time.